Here I am, climbing up, feeling great, getting love. Here I go, risk it all, be worth it now, and that's for sure. Watch me as I rock a team.
All right, here we are, Fight Talk Down Under, episode 2. We're a couple of days behind this week. Normally we'd be releasing on a Tuesday, but commiserations to all the ladies out there. But I actually got married on Sunday, so that's the reason for the delay this week. It's been a bit of a hectic week, but we will be consistent. We do promise. Now, feedback from episode 1's been really good. One thing that did repeatedly come up was that I didn't actually introduce myself. So, for those who don't know, I'm Dan Meehan. I'm, I guess you could say, a part-time journalist. I work for Fight News Australia. My video interviews are all over YouTube. My articles are all on Fight News Australia, as well as some other episodes. So there you go. For those who haven't suffered through one of my interviews, there you go. That's me. And normally in my interviews, a rule of thumb is that I don't interview fighters in fight week, because generally they're cutting weight, and the interviews can be pretty difficult. But here I am about to do an entire podcast with one. Of course, my co-host, Lockjaw Justin Van Heerden, is back in action this Friday at Melbourne Pavilion on Ep.2 against Joshua Riley. So, Justin, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here to record episode 2. Obviously, yeah, like you said, we had a delay with yourself with the wedding celebrations. But that's a positive sort of situation, a positive delay, I'd call it. Yeah, and obviously I'm in fight week, obviously for Ep.2, cutting weight, doing all that sort of stuff, the usual sort of stuff, but it's good. I'm enjoying myself. I'm not quite irritable yet, as I probably will be closer to Wayne time tomorrow, should I say.
Absolutely, and before we get stuck into the episode, of course, we've got a huge UFC 271 card to cover off from this past weekend, as well as some local fights. But before we get to all that, you tell us a little bit about the matchup you've got on this weekend, and sort of how you see that one.
So yeah, I'm taking on Joshua Riley. Hasn't fought for a while. Hasn't fought since 2019. So I guess, he's been working, chipping away, looking to improve, and, it feels like now's a good time for him to get back in the cage and compete. It's always hard to base it off someone who hasn't fought for a while, like a couple of years. So, I'm just treating it as, a fresh sort of thing. He's coming in. I'm expecting him to be dangerous. I'm expecting him to be ready for the fight to go anywhere. But, I've been working. This is my 3rd fight camp that I've been doing, back to back. So I'm in shape. The work's been done. I've improved in every sort of avenue of mixed martial arts you can think of. Training with the best guys in Australia. So I expect to go out there and dominate completely from the opening bell until the fight ends. That's sort of how I see it going.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. So yeah, and obviously before all that goes ahead, we've had UFC 271 on the weekend. A huge card littered with Australian and Kiwi talent. So let's just break it down. Let's just go through what happened on the night. And I guess the first one up is a Kiwi. It was Blood Diamond. Obviously a lot was expected of Blood Diamond coming to this one. Of course, coming from City Kickboxing, obviously well credentialed in the kickboxing world. He was 3-0 in MMA coming into the fight, but he's been beaten pretty comprehensively by a more experienced mixed martial artist, really, in Jeremiah Wells, losing by round 2 rear naked choke submission. So, yeah, how did you see that one playing out?
I wasn't to say. I'm surprised by the result isn't probably accurate. Jeremiah Wells immediately closed the distance, pushed Blood Diamond up against the cage, and then controlled him, and just really, took away any capacity for him to separate, remove himself from the cage, and get to that sort of striking range where he's comfortable. And then, ultimately, broke him down, wore him down, put him on the ground. He was just stuck. You could tell there was whether it was a mix of a lack of experience in those areas and as well as, the first fight sort of jitters in the UFC, but he kind of just was like a deer in headlights, and we saw Wells snatch a rear naked choke. He, didn't even have the hooks in, felt comfortable with the position as to where he could just finish the choke how it was. And we saw, Blood Diamond get choked unconscious, which obviously it's a rough way for your debut to go in the UFC. But as you said before, you kind of touched on it. He took on a more experienced mixed martial artist, someone who is already so comfortable and, adept to being in the cage and fighting in MMA with that rule set, with all those sort of different avenues available, as opposed to, just a stand-up fight. But in saying that, Blood Diamond's got some good people around him. He's got a good team around him. He's got good coaches around him. I can definitely see him bouncing back and doing the things that we kind of expected of him in this fight. But I do believe that his team and himself need to take a step back and reflect on the fact that everybody that he gets matched up with moving forward is going to put him on his back. That is going to be, they won't even be a strike thrown. It'll be like a Hamzat Chimaev type approach where as soon as you get close, a punch is thrown, there's a shot, you're taken down, and they're going to look to capitalize on that. So that's something that they're going to really have to work on defensively to improve on.
So we talked about this in the episode 1, actually, about bridging the gap for people coming from a striking background, trying to bridge the gap in terms of grappling. It is a sort of quite a broad skill set that people have to be equipped with if they're going to fight in the highest level of mixed martial arts. So, at 33 years old, sort of, I guess, how easy is it going to be for someone like Blood Diamond to sort of bridge the gap between the rest of the UFC caliber competition?
Very difficult. It's going to require, like I said, it's going to require you actually being invested in those sessions where you are working on those areas where you need to improve on, and not just going through the motions, not just doing them for the sake of doing them and then going, no, it's cool because when I have the opportunity to do what I want to do, I'm gonna go out there and shine. Well, not if you're put on your back within the first couple of seconds and you have no avenue to get back to the feet and do those things. So he's really going to have to knuckle down, get stuck in with the team and, work to improve and take it seriously, which I think he will. I want to see, him bounce back and do well. But right now, that's sort of the understanding is going to be you're going to get put on your back and you're going to get picked apart.
I guess there's the potential for someone like Blood Diamond to be sort of part of some of those like novelty fights. He could be. There's some really fun fights for the striking type fighters like Blood Diamond, but realistically, he's going to have to bounce back and reel off some wins. Otherwise, there really is no interest in that sort of thing unless he's got some sort of a body of work going into it. So. Yeah, he's got a bit of a way to go there, as we found out on the weekend. But I guess that's what you do. You go in there at 3-0, and you just find out, don't you? And he's just going to have to knuckle down and try and bridge the gap. But one guy who doesn't have an issue in the grappling department was Jacob Malkoon. He obviously took on AJ Dobson and had a bit of a rough first round on the feet, but eventually Dobson sort of got sucked into the grappling on the cage in round 2, and sort of Malkoon was able to impose his game plan from there. So, yeah, how did you view that one?
Yeah, 100%. That first round, Dobson, was looking like an absolute gun. He was, looked like he was comfortable going through the motions, and he was obviously putting it on Jacob a bit. It was a rough round for him. Jacob was shooting from out of position. He was reaching for takedowns and just he wasn't setting it up. He wasn't trying to engage with anything to allow him to get to the hips and actually take the fight down. And Dobson was able to kind of do his thing and land some pretty hard strikes and stuff on him on the feet and kind of really pick him apart. But then obviously as it went into the second round, we saw Malkoon able to adjust. And one thing I will give him is he kept going for the takedowns. He kept pursuing it. And then eventually as the fight went on into the second round and then into the third, he ultimately was getting those takedowns and getting the control and, beating up AJ and absolutely grinding him out. But that is a test to the adjustments that were made, and then realizing that he needed to set the takedowns up better. And then once he did take him down, you get that confidence. Once you put someone down on the ground on their back, the first time the next time you go to do it, you're like, okay, it's going to be a bit easier now. And then the next time it's a bit easier, and then it just gets easier and easier because you're more confident. They're sort of a bit more, worried about that aspect, but also you're finding yourself doing it the correct way. So I think that's what you saw there. And then ultimately his cardio was just better than Dobson's. He was able to continually pull him down, continually wear on him, just grind him out. And then, won rounds 2 and 3 quite comfortably and was able to grind out a decision. And yeah, that was it. But as for, it's positive. It's a positive outcome. He got the result. He got the win. But as for him moving forward, it's going to be a case of we need to bridge some gaps as well. There's some guys, especially in the middleweight division, where if you are reaching out of position for the legs or you're trying to take them down like that, you're going to get battered. You're going to get pieced up and ultimately find yourself stuck on the feet. And if you're not comfortable there, if you're not confident there, and you don't really feel you're a well-rounded mixed martial artist, that's going to be a big problem, and especially in a weight class like that where everyone's got the ability to put you to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you can't, like you said, you can't really fault his persistence in pursuing that takedown, but he did look a little stiff standing up there. But I guess Malkoon's quite a young guy. It's only his 7th professional fight in MMA, so I feel like I guess facing a bit of adversity in the first round, like he still came out with a win, which is important, but facing a bit of adversity like that in the first round is probably a valuable lesson really for a guy at that stage of his career. So, how do you feel that'll kind of benefit him, and what's the ceiling for a guy like Malkoon really?
100%, especially on a card like that in Houston with a big crowd like that, going through some adversity and realizing, man, I'm about to potentially lose in front of thousands of people, and then rallying up, coming back and winning the fight, it's going to give you a big boost. And if you're in those positions moving forward where you might experience some adversity, you're going to be able to adjust and handle them better and ultimately put yourself in a better position. He's definitely got potential, but it's going to take, a lot of hard work to sort of bridge those gaps. And then also, he needs to just keep racking up that experience. And I'd like to see him do a slow climb up, in the division and kind of work his way, put the work in and kind of take the matchups that make sense, do it the right way and kind of build himself up. Because, a guy like that with his cardio, his grit, his determination and his grappling pedigree, he could be a problem for a lot of people. But if you don't improve the other areas or you get rushed into some of this higher caliber competition, you're going to hit a brick wall, and then ultimately, next thing you know, you're 3 fights down and you're not in the UFC anymore and you're wondering what happened. So I think, that's going to be crucial, but he's got a good team around him. He's got someone like Whitaker that's kind of laying the pathway for him to follow, and someone that he sort of shares the mats with. So all the cards are in his hand. He's just got to play them properly.
And speaking of building guys up, Carlos Ulberg of City Kickboxing was successful in his second attempt at UFC level. He defeated Fabio Charont by decision. So I guess Ulberg, he's got a bit of an interesting style, doesn't he? He's got a bit of an interesting sort of stand-up style. He seemed to last a bit better over the course of the 3 rounds this time. So how did you assess his performance on the night?
Look, I'll be honest, his cardio and stuff looked better. He was obviously, was able to go through the 3 rounds and he looked pretty fresh in each sort of round as it went on. Ultimately, though, it's a hard performance to sort of look at and get excited about, especially in that weight division. He kind of point fought his way to a victory and never really looked like he had plenty of opportunities where it looked like he could put Fabio Charont away, but he just was comfortable with just point fighting and, kind of just doing enough, which is fine. It works. You got the win. But in a weight division where moving forward, the road ahead is so tough for you and the caliber of people that you're going to fight, man, you gotta have that instinct to take the advantages to finish a fight when you can. Because if you're sitting here trying to point fight with some of these other dudes, I mean, you get the shit beat out of you because you're just going to leave yourself open. And as you said, like obviously he's got a good sort of stand up style and he's quite handy on the feet, but he's got a few things that he kind of like got his chin up high, he stands pretty tall. All those are things that might work now against this sort of subpar competition. Um, but when you get to those sort of upper echelon type guys, man, you're going to be in for a rough night. But there were positives to take away from it. Like you said, his cardio held up. He looked fresh as the fight went on. He looked a lot more composed, a lot more patient, and that's credit to the team and the work that they did, and the people that he has around him. And obviously, you could tell that the game plan was formulated quite well by Eugene, and to use his ability and to look at an opponent like Charant and be able to do that and successfully pick him apart. But was I impressed? Do I think that there's something crazy that we should be looking forward to in his next fight? Not really, but yeah, as you said though, he's got to win. You got to ride that momentum now, but let's see some adjustments moving forward into the next fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess someone like Yulberg, like we discussed in episode 1, he's come into the UFC with 3 professional MMA fights under his belt. So, I guess someone like that who's pretty inexperienced is going to look a little out of place on a UFC card a lot of the time. And those things like you mentioned there with the chin up in the air and just being a bit rough around the edges, it really stands out when you're sort of in that sort of sink or swim environment in the UFC. But at the end of the day, I think he had a pretty limited opponent on the night. I think Fabio Charant is now 0-3 in the UFC, so I think we can probably expect him to be in the next round of releases from the UFC contract. But at the end of the day, he's proven to be a pretty limited fighter, and it was probably a good dance partner for Carlos in the end. So, I guess I think Carlos is I think he's 31 years old or thereabouts. So for someone like him, is looks like he's come into the game fairly late. Again, what sort of a ceiling does someone like that have? Obviously, he's quite athletic, and he probably can progress if he sticks at it. But how far do you think someone like him can actually go?
Marketability wise, he's ticking those boxes. He's obviously a great athlete. He's got some decent stand up, obviously. But yeah, it's a rough weight division. It's almost a rougher path forward for him in a way than it would be for someone like Blood Diamond. Because you're in the light heavyweight division, you're in a weight division where one punch could put you away, and everybody's got knockout power. Everybody's got the ability to put you to sleep. So it's a tricky one. He's got the potential, and he's got the team and the coaches and the experienced training partners and people to kind of help him on the path and guide him. But it's really going to depend on him asking himself the question, like, are you doing this because you want to be a world champion, or, you want to be in the UFC and you want to like kind of be one of the best fighters on the planet? Or are you doing it because it's going well right now, the momentum's gone your way, and, the sort of the boxes are being ticked for you, and you're kind of, everything's looking great. And then as soon as it doesn't, what's going to happen after that? So I think that's going to be the crucial tell. If he is unfortunate enough to lose again, how does he approach bouncing back from that? And then it's also going to depend on what the UFC kind of wants to do with him and what they offer him next, because there's a bunch of guys at light heavyweight that are a problem for someone like Carlos, especially like we said with those little holes that he has in his game. So I'm excited to see what happens, but ultimately it's going to depend on whether or not he's here because he wants to be a professional athlete and one of the best fighters on the planet, or if he's here to just fill some time and do something that's working out right now and then bounce on to the next thing when it pops up.
Yeah, well, I guess he's off the mark now, so, he's got a UFC win under his belt, so it's definitely going to be an interesting watch either way, just to see how far he can go, whether City Kickboxing can kind of progress him to the point where he's a factor in the UFC division, or whether he's just there for his 15 minutes of fame. I guess we'll find out, but One person who's certainly had no issues with rebounding from defeats, because she hasn't had one yet. It's Casey O'Neill. She was also on the prelim card. Probably a dominant performance, as you probably would have expected, really, in the end, against Roxanne Modafferi. Now the cards will show that it was a split decision. Normally don't get drawn too much into commenting on judging, as we know the mixed martial arts is largely subjective in terms of judging, but it seems a bit insane that one of them has viewed that one for Roxanne Modafferi. But yeah, how did you see the fight playing out?
Yeah, look, that I don't know what that judge was doing. Definitely not a split decision. Obviously, I understand that, Casey outstruck almost 3-1, set a new striking record for a 3-round fight in a women's flyweight fight. Just went out there and kind of did what she does, but it was dominant in one sense, in that kind of sense, but in a few other ways it wasn't. I mean, look at your face after the fight. Like, can you really say that you were dominant when you got, your face is damaged like that? And that's not a knock on her performance. Like, she obviously killed her, but, there's no reason why someone like Roxanne should be able to touch you and make you look like that in a fight. So that's a credit to her too, for her last fight, coming forward nonstop for 3 rounds, trying to punch Casey in the face, and only really looking for 2 takedowns throughout the whole fight. Once at the end of the round of the second round, I believe, and then again in the third round. But ultimately, yeah, it was just a slugfest. It was an entertaining fight. It was a fun fight to watch, and it was a great fight to watch, to see Casey kind of beat someone who's got a bit of notoriety in the sport, someone that everyone's respects so highly and they're quite fond of, and to kind of just take that step forward and take away some of that momentum. And then on the other end, it was cool to see Roxy have a scrap for her last sort of fight and kind of retire on a high in that way. But I think that, to be honest, I think moving forward for Casey, the challenges are only going to get stiffer. And if someone like Roxanne is able to touch you and damage you and, leave you all battered and bruised like that, there's an absolute row of killers ahead for you in this division. And especially you're talking about wanting to fight Valentina and stuff like that. If that's what someone like Roxy can do to you, who isn't a striker, like, let's be honest, there's some work that needs to be done before you are facing some of these other women in the flyweight division. But she's got a good team around her. She's got a good relationship, it seems, with the whoever she's dealing with at the UFC. So I hope that they continue the trend that she is on now, and kind of pick these matchups for her that are making sense, and kind of they're not rushing and they're not trying to just push it too hard, because obviously she's undefeated, 9-0, absolutely killing it. So there's a couple of questions there, but yeah, and a few adjustments I think that need to be made. But yeah, it was an entertaining fight, and it was a great win for Casey. So yeah, excited to see what's next for her in the division.
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up actually, like whether it's because Casey's 9-0 now, she's 4-0 in the UFC. She's beaten some solid fighters at this point, so it's easy for people to get kind of excited about her potential, and it would be tempting to kind of push her up the ranks. Like, we find the women's divisions can be a little bit sort of light on in terms of the rankings and things like that. So do you feel like this kind of sets a... Do you feel like maybe she lost a bit of stock on this performance? Like, do you think maybe now they might look to build her up a bit slowly rather than throwing her to the wolves just based on sort of what we saw in this performance, or do you think she's still on track?
It's going to depend on the energy that she carries moving forward. Obviously, you saw after the fact she was quite upset by everything. She, had some choice words and stuff like that. And it's going to depend on her. If she keeps talking out of pocket about, I want to, about fighting Valentina and how she's the one that's going to beat her and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's cool. That's great. That you should have that confidence. If you don't think you can beat the champion, you shouldn't be fighting. You shouldn't be fighting in that division, obviously. So that's, but that's something that's going to produce a sort of jump forward, as you said. She's on a win streak. She's undefeated. Very quickly, they could start putting this narrative there that, okay, this is the person to beat Valentina. And then before you know it, you're rushed into a title fight. You're fighting Valentina. And maybe you could have used a couple more fights to kind of build yourself up a bit more and kind of get there at the right time as opposed to the hype time, I'd say.
Absolutely, and I guess for Roxy's part, she's obviously hung up the gloves as we mentioned after this one. So, she's finished at I think 25-21 was her record, 4-8 in the UFC. So she's had a couple of stints in the UFC. Probably hasn't quite sort of had the success that she would have hoped. Maybe wasn't quite up to the level. But how do you sort of assess her career overall? Like as she walks out the door, how would you reflect on Roxanne Modafferi as a fighter?
Probably one of the most crucial people for women's MMA. Obviously, you look at some of the stats of when she made her debut. Some of these other people who are now superstars in the women's divisions weren't even really relevant in the sport. So it's like people like herself and like Gina Carano that kind of laid the pathway for these women, and that led to the Ronda Rouseys, the Valentinas, the Joannas, the Rose Namajunas, So and now obviously the Casey O'Neills, the next sort of cream and crop that's coming up in those divisions. But obviously you look at her record, and if you didn't know much about the sport or you didn't know much about her, you look at her record and her stint in the UFC and go, oh well, she was pretty terrible. But really, she came in, she accomplished everything she wanted to. I think she spoke a bit about that, and she was happy with the way that she kind of hung the gloves up in the last fight that she kind of had. So yeah, nothing but respect and admiration. She's obviously one of the most likable sort of fighters, I guess, in the sport. With people like Adesanya and that even coming out on the weekend and saying like, they got nothing but good things to say about her. And if anyone doesn't like her, they can kind of pull their heads in because that's pretty silly. So that just shows you the effect that she had on the fans and other fighters and stuff like that. And obviously she's a pioneer of the sport. So I think she's had a great career, and it's good to see that she's decided to hang it up, because it's always better, it's for real when the fighter decides and there's no sort of outside kind of push for it. But I think she'll still compete in jiu-jitsu, because that's something that she was doing in between fights. She competes quite actively in jiu-jitsu. I mean, I'd like to see her continue to do that, obviously, and I'd imagine she's got some other avenues that she can pursue. I don't think this is going to be the last time you sort of see her in any capacity in the sport. So yeah, she's obviously had a good career, and now she's kind of passed the torch to someone like Casey, and it's now her time to kind of build herself up, and then one day we'll be going, she's walking away from the sport, and what a contribution she made, and look at her career, and that's kind of what you want to see.
It's a great point you bring up there, actually, about I guess Roxanne being a real pioneer of the sport. Like, obviously, Ronda Rousey is the one that's credited with really bringing the women's MMA into the mainstream. But there's people like her don't just sort of emerge out of nowhere, do they? There's a chain of events that lead to a big superstar like that emerging, and Roxanne Modafferi was probably a part of that early generation, along with like Shayna Baszler and some of those others there. That were involved in women's MMA when no one was really watching, and Dana White was saying, we'll never have women's MMA in the UFC, and there was people like her that were chipping away and sort of setting the wheels in motion for someone like Ronda Rousey to emerge. And really, at the end of the day, Roxanne found herself in the UFC probably towards the end of her career as she was getting older. So it was probably, she was probably in there. Kind of reaping the benefits of her own work really earlier in life, towards the end of her career. So, she really deserves nothing but respect, I guess, in retirement. But sorry, you go.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, yeah, the only thing that's tricky for her. What's tricky for her is she's a pioneer of the sport. She was fighting before the women's MMA was a thing in the UFC, and the game. As you saw, MMA is just a fast-evolving sport, and you look at the women's divisions from when Ronda Rousey first came into the sport to even now. That's not a long time period, but the game's evolved so much, and that's something that she just had to deal with in her career towards the end, and being in the UFC, but the game just evolved kind of past her in that capacity, almost. But I'd challenge people to go back and watch some of her earlier fights. Go go do your research, go do your homework, and go appreciate some of the work that she did before it was cool for women's MMA to be a thing.
Yeah, I guess that's it's a good point as well, isn't it? When you have a long career like that, when you're in such a fast evolving sport like MMA, it's hard to keep up. As you get older, the game can kind of leave you in the dust. But she's certainly earlier in her career she was very dangerous. But on the moving on to sort of the main card for the Australian portion, we had Tai Tuivasa in the co-main event. He produced a pretty spectacular knockout of the knockout record holder himself in Derek Lewis. It was a round 2 KO. He had a bit of a rough first round as well, but managed to land a big combination and a huge elbow to send Derek Lewis crashing face first to the canvas. But I guess Tai, he's kind of shown some overall skills here. Like Derek kind of attempted some takedowns early on, and Tai was able to kind of weather the storm and get back to his feet. And he's shown he's no longer a banger. He's got some elbows, he's got some leg kicks, he's got some takedown defense. So what do you make of Tai Tuivasa on the weekend?
First things first, I would say that if someone bet on Derek Lewis to get takedowns, I hope they made a lot of money, because I don't think anyone expected Derek Lewis to do that and to have such finesse in the way that he did it with some trips like that from the clinch position. But yeah, Tai obviously killed it. First round, there was a lot of clinching, a lot of work up against the cage. I think that's but that's a compliment to both guys, and as dangerous as they are with the power that they possess. And for a sec there, I was kind of just being like, all right, both guys are kind of worried about what's coming their way. They're choosing to keep it sort of close. And then we saw Derek kind of make the adjustment instantly and go, okay, well, you want to stay in this sort of clinch position with me. Let's see what your wrestling's like. Was able to take Tai down, but as you said, he weathered the storm. There's a few times where I think he got buzzed a bit by some of the shots that Derek was throwing. We saw that brief portion where he was kind of on the mat and Derek was unloading with some heavy shots. He was able to survive, and then get back to his feet, kind of readjust, go into his corner, get the advice that he needed to get. And then it shows the progression that he's made, because he came out and made the adjustments. And then ultimately we saw him able to sting Derek, push him against the cage, and land that devastating elbow that obviously, sent him face first into the canvas and left him unconscious for a period of time. So there was only one way that fight was going to go. Either Tai was going to get knocked out or Derek was going to get knocked out. And ultimately it was Tai who was blessed on the night. He's the one that found that shot and found that mark first. And it was a entertaining fight for how short it was, really, for how long it lasted. Full credit to both guys for coming out and sticking to kind of what they said, and we're not giving us a repeat of the Derek Lewis, Francis Ngannou fight where nothing happened. And now Tai's moved up. He's ranked 3rd in the division. I believe he came into the fight. He was number 11. So he's right there now. He's on a win streak. He's in the top 3 in the division. So we could be talking about Tai fighting for an interim title against someone like Stipe, or potentially getting a matchup with Cyril Gane, and then the winner of that fight faces the winner of Stipe and John Jones. There's a few little things. I did see that they were saying, oh, what should be next for Tai, and there was like talking about maybe potentially being like Tom Aspinall or someone like that, but it just makes no sense. He's got a fight on the UFC London card. He's fighting Volkov, which is a dangerous fight, and I feel like they've kind of rushed him into that fight. So I don't even know why they're trying to. It almost seems like they're trying to offer, I don't know, steps backward for Tai when he's got all this momentum moving forward. And so I'd like to see him fight someone like Cyril Gane, someone like John Jones, potentially someone like Curtis Blades, those upper echelon dudes in that kind of top 5. But obviously he has all the momentum, put on a great performance, another knockout, another shoey. I think he's in Mexico right now celebrating, so he'll potentially already have a fight that he's accepted and that he's matched up for, that we'll find out about in the next coming days or coming weeks, and we'll see what happens for him.
And I guess he'll find out about it in the coming days as well, because I don't think he really remembered accepting the Derek Lewis fight at the end of the day. But Yeah, 5-fight win streak. Like you say, ranked number 3. With all the momentum in the world. So, yeah, like you touched on the Tom Aspinall matchup. Just look, it's a fun one on paper, but it just makes no sense if you're Tai Tuivasa, does it? Like it's a high risk, low reward sort of scenario where you've got a tough up and coming guy like Aspinall who's dangerous, and I don't know whether he's ranked or where exactly he is on the rankings, but I imagine he wouldn't be that high up.
I believe he's dropped down now. I believe he's like 10th or 11th or something, somewhere around there.
Okay. So it doesn't really make sense to look backwards, does it? When you've just sewn up the number 3 ranking. I don't think Tai Tuivasa really cares too much about rankings and title belts and stuff. I think he's just about, punching on and getting paid and, drinking beers, or at least that's the narrative that he likes to push anyway. But, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But, assuming that doesn't go ahead, how do you think he goes against the top 5 guys? Like you touched on Curtis Blades as a potential opponent there. Like that would be an interesting test for him with a guy with a wrestling pedigree who's had a bit of trouble with power punches like Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis. So, but how do you think he would fare against the top 5 guys? I mean, obviously he's just beaten Derek Lewis, who's only one fight removed from an interim title fight, so that's a huge win. But I think there are guys in that top 5 that are a step up maybe from Derek Lewis. So how do you think Tai Tuivasa would mix it with guys of that caliber?
Yeah, some tough matchups. Obviously, someone like Curtis who can wrestle, if he's able to avoid some of those power punches and get a hold of Tai, then Tai's going to be in for a rough night. I know Tai's obviously worked to improve in every aspect. He's obviously, it's working for him. You can tell he's a complete mixed martial artist and happy to engage in wherever the fight goes, and seems to be patient and like he's actually doing the work. But Curtis, that's a potentially tricky matchup for him, especially with Curtis's wrestling pedigree. Then you got someone like Stipe, which is very well rounded, definitely a step up in level. For someone like Tai, you got John Jones lurking. Is he going to fight in the division? Is he not going to fight? He's a rough matchup for everyone in the division except for maybe Francis Ngannou, just purely based on the fact that Francis is the champion. Got to give him the full respect, and he's Francis Ngannou. If he hits you, you're going to die. And now that he can wrestle, that's even scarier. And then you got people like Cyril Gane. That might be a fun fight for Tai, because Cyril obviously likes to stand up, fight from rage, pick people apart, but Tai's one of those people who moves forward, happy to clinch against the cage. So, there's interesting matchups for him, and they're definitely all winnable because it's the heavyweight division. One punch can change everything. And he's someone now that isn't just relying on a puncher's chance. He's trying to be a complete mixed martial artist. He's got all the momentum and all the confidence. So, I could definitely see him winning all those fights. The 2 fights I'm probably the most sketchy about is the Francis Ngannou and John Jones fights. Those are a couple of rough matchups for him.
Yeah, I guess like you say, in the heavyweight division, and particularly a power puncher like Tuivasa, you just you can't count them out. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. They're never out of the game. They're only one shot away from turning the tide. So it's going to be very interesting to see. First of all, what the UFC does with him. If they are looking at giving him Tom Aspinall, maybe they don't believe in him. As a true contender, but. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes with him next. So it's going to be a good watch. That's if he manages to survive Mexico. I don't know whether he'll come back in one piece from there. That's also going to be an interesting watch on social media, definitely. So, it's always fun with Tai Tuivasa. Whatever happens is, it's always entertaining. So, we love having guys like that in the UFC.
100%.
In the main event, of course. Following that was obviously Whittaker versus Adesanya. It turned out to be a much more competitive fight than the first time around. Probably early on it looked like it might have been heading in a similar direction to the first fight, but Whittaker, as he so often does, just he steadied the ship, and he was he was competitive towards the back end of the fight. So he thought he did enough to win. I think the general consensus is that probably Adesanya did enough. But how did you view it?
Man, I'm gonna sound like I'm just ragging on Robert Whittaker right now. Obviously, I just want to point out I've never met the bloke, but everyone tells me he's super nice, and he does seem super nice and seems like a quite likable guy. But man, I don't know how he thinks he won the fight. A couple of takedowns where you got the takedown, but you didn't really do any damage. You didn't really for threaten with submissions. You didn't really control for long enough for it to be significant and go, oh, okay, well, that's a dominant round. I thought this was a pretty clear 4-1 in Izzy's favor. I feel like we could give the second round to Rob. It was a very close round. It was a tight round, and then the takedown in that round was kind of something significant that happened in the fight. But as it went on, I don't really see too much. I mean, I understand, he was landing some jabs. He wasn't really throwing the right hand because obviously he didn't want to commit to the right hands too much with what happened the first time. And obviously Izzy's a dangerous person to try and engage with on the feet. But yeah, I don't know why he thought he won. I don't know why there's this narrative where other people are kind of like, oh yeah, Rob won. He was robbed. It should have been the other way around. And you see people like Gaethje tweeting out, and like Michael Chandler tweeting out that they thought that Rob won, um, or whatever. But I'm sorry, if you're fighting the champion, unless you finish them, or unless you're doing what Kamaru Usman did to Woodley, you can't expect to walk away with a belt. Like you can't do some like do and like Izzy said it himself, you can't just do enough and then think that you're going to win. Because it's just not the case. You're fighting someone who's a dominant champion, someone who's got a dangerous style, who's very good on the feet, who clearly showed that he's made the improvements in the wrestling and being able to kind of like get back to his feet and be defensive in those positions and kind of shut that down. And then he was doing his thing. He was touching Robert when the opportunities were there. He was picking apart from range. He was attacking the leg. He obviously dropped him in the first round. There's everything that he was doing was working, and the numbers are in his favor for the fight with the significant strikes and everything like that. It's a hard one to look at and kind of go, oh no, Robert was robbed, and I'm seeing this across the board, obviously from people who don't really know too much about the sport to people who know a lot about the sport, and like especially like analysts and former fighters and current fighters and stuff like that being like, oh, it was clearly a win to Robert, and I just don't know what everyone had in their drinks while they were watching the fight. But yeah, no, it was a dominant performance to Izzy, 4-1. Obviously, Robert made the adjustments. The fight went the distance. There wasn't a finish, so you got to give him credit. He brought a completely different sort of outcome to the fight. But yeah, it's the way it stands right now. Israel Adesanya is the best middleweight on the planet. Robert Whittaker is the second best middleweight on the planet, and both those guys are a few steps up from everyone else in the division. And then, yeah, that's just where it is. He's kind of in limbo now. I guess Robert's got to kind of go on a run again now, beat a few contenders to kind of try and get another fight with Izzy. But then you're just in a weird position, man. Like I was saying to some people in the lead up to this fight, if Robert doesn't win, it's kind of a very similar situation to what Max Holloway will be in if that third fight comes to fruition with Volk. If you lose, man, you got to leave the division. You got to either go up in weight. You got to go up in weight. You got to figure something out because you're not going to get another title fight after that. Doesn't matter if you beat everyone else in the division. It's not gonna happen. The only way you get another title fight is if someone else is able to beat the champion and you're the next sort of contender and have secured a shot, and then you can kind of make that happen. So it'll be interesting to see what Robert does if he stays at middleweight and just goes on a run, beats the other contenders and kind of tries to cement himself to another claim at the title. And it's going to be interesting to see if Adesanya is even still a champion, which I think he will be. I don't see anyone currently able to beat him. Or is Robert going to decide to go up in weight, fight a light heavyweight? Is he going to try and go back down to welterweight? Probably not, because he didn't have much success at welterweight. It was a pretty rough stint for him there, and obviously at middleweight, his only 2 losses at middleweight are to the current champion. So it makes sense for him to stay there. It makes sense for him to continue forward, which he will. And he's a warrior, and he's someone who's going to bounce back and be even better. But it's just going to be very tough to sell a third fight between the two of them.
I guess you're absolutely spot on there. Like that was pretty much what I was going to bring up on this one. He's the second best fighter in the middleweight division. But he's in that weird spot, like you said. He's 0-2 against the champ. He's pretty much beaten all the other contenders. Like pretty much the number one contender fight with Derek Brunson versus Jared Cannonier. He's beaten both of those two already. So what is there for him to achieve? I don't know. It's a difficult one because, like you say, someone else is going to have to take the belt, but who's going to beat Izzy? Like it's hard to see from where I sit anyway. It's hard to see Cannonier or Brunson or any of the next guys in line sort of beating Israel Adesanya for me. So Whittaker's in a weird spot, and he's going to have to go back, and I think he's going to have to just make himself undeniable again, like he did last time. He reeled off 3 wins in a row against good opposition. So. He's going to have to go back to the drawing board, and he's going to have to fight his way back up again. And I think that's the only way that they're going to sell a third fight at the end of the day. So, yeah, he's got his work cut out, but it sounds like he's not going anywhere. So it sounds like he's determined. So I feel like he's going to be a little bit undersized if he went up to 205. And like you said, he had a bit of trouble making 170 and it wasn't really a successful stint down there. So I think his best bet's to stay where he is and just keep knocking on that door.
100%. And, with Cannonier likely being the next sort of contender for Izzy to defend his belt against, there's some other fights lurking, but I could potentially see them doing a Sean Strickland versus Robert Whittaker fight. If that's, that could potentially be the first matchup he gets offered now. Because obviously Strickland's...
That's a fun one.
That'd be a good scrap. Strickland's he's on a win streak. The dude's game, likes to stand and bang. Talks a lot of shit, talks to his opponents while he's fighting them, and to see how he handles someone like Whittaker, that'd be an interesting sort of matchup for him, because obviously we saw with Hermanson, he wasn't able to get the takedowns and he kind of struggled a lot, but Bobby Knuckles, that's a whole nother level, and he is going to be able to get the takedowns if he chooses to, and he's going to be more than willing to stand and bang with someone like Sean, who really is just using his hands, just does a lot of boxing. He's obviously very good on the feet. He's able to avoid shots and fight at a really good range, has a great understanding of range. Probably a credit to the fact that he spars so much, because obviously the guy that's talked about a lot, he spars a shitload. So that's you can definitely see that in his fights. But so it'd be a much easier fight for Whittaker than it is for Strickland, because obviously, Strickland's mostly working with the hands. Whittaker's pretty well rounded and he's got good stand up as well. Be able to blitz in and out. He doesn't kind of just stand there in front of you, and especially now with the adjustments that he's made since his 2 fights with Adesanya.
Absolutely, like it's I guess Strickland's it's a fun matchup, but but probably, like you say, from where I said, he's probably not quite on Whittaker's level at the end of the day. But he's a guy with a bit of momentum. It's a winnable fight for Whittaker, and it's a fun one for the fans. So I think it makes a lot of sense from a UFC perspective. So there you go. Step aside, Mick Maynard. We've got Justin Van Heerden in the building. He's got it down. But moving forward, we've got this weekend. We've got another Aussie in the UFC. It's Jessica Rose Clark. She's taking on Stephanie Egger. She's 11-6. Jessica Rose Clark. She's 4-2 in the UFC. She's on a 2-fight win streak with an ACL surgery in between, and she's 34 years old, but she seems to be improving despite her injury issues. Every time we see her in the cage, she seems a bit stronger. So, how do you see this matchup playing out?
Yeah, I think she despite her age and everything like that, and the sort of hurdle she's hit, with injuries and surgeries and stuff like that, she looks like she's improving heaps every time we see her in there, and she looks more and more dangerous. She obviously, she's doing the work. She's got a good team, great coach. So, I think she's doing it right. I think she's found the right fit for her MMA sort of game, her mentality, and just, I guess, everything that's coming her way, and being able to deal with it all, but then still focus on improving, putting the work in, and then coming out and putting on these violent performances, which we've come to see on this little run that she's starting to make now. I don't see Stephanie as being a an overly difficult matchup. Obviously, it's a challenging fight for her. She's not a slouch, obviously, but I think we're going to be able to see Jessica, take control of the fight, be very damaging on the feet, very damaging in the clinch, lots of elbows, lots of knees, and if the takedowns happen or there's some grappling involved, she's more than comfortable in those positions. But I can see her getting a TKO in the second round with just being violent and doing the damage, especially in that sort of boxing and clinch range.
Yeah, I think Stephanie. She's got a pretty strong grappling pedigree from the look of things there, and it is an interesting matchup from that perspective. But sort of like you touched on there, Jesse's got a pretty diverse arsenal standing up, and she's quite a physically strong fighter as well. So I think that she's kind of. Again, despite her age, she's kind of that new breed of fighter. She's well rounded, and she's just got that sort of physicality factor. And I think that's really going to, like you touched on there, I think that's going to play a factor in this one. But where do you think she stands in the division? I keep saying it. She's 34 years old, which is kind of in mixed martial arts. It's not it's not that old really. But she's just worked her way into the rankings. Yeah, where do you think she stands, and how far do you think Jessie Jess can go?
Man, like I said, she's got a great coach, great team at CSA. So, like, I could see her, definitely making a run towards the belt and getting a title shot. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at the top of the division now and kind of how it all plays out between Pena and Nunes and everything that's sort of in between. Especially now with someone like Misha Tate dropping down to flyweight, being out of the picture in that sort of capacity as well. But if she keeps up with the performances she's been doing lately and kind of approaches the fights the same way, man, I don't see her not being able to go on a run and fight for a belt potentially towards the end of the year or even early 2023.
For sure. And before we call it a night, we've got on this weekend just gone was Coastal Combat. Of course, we've got the Coastal Combat featherweight champion in our ranks here. I'll let you guys guess which one of us that is. But of course, that Coastal Combat 10 went down over the weekend. We had Melbourne's own Lisa Kiriako was successful in the main event. And probably the other one to cover off was Cooper Royal. He's obviously a highly talented amateur prospect coming out of Queensland there, and we think I guess there's a lot of raps on him. There's some high expectations for someone like Cooper Royal. So how did you sort of see those two fights playing out?
Yeah, well, first off, Cooper Royal obviously defended his amateur bantamweight title against Scotty Nicholson from Ignite Martial Arts. Cooper's based in Queensland as well. He trains at Fitzroy Martial Arts, but I think he does travel a bit down to various sort of places and gets a sort of diverse range of work in with different people. But yeah, he put on a show, just absolutely put on a show, picked Scotty Nicholson apart, heard him a few times and just showed out and shined with his striking and showed that, he's going to be a problem moving forward for the people in the two weight divisions that he fights in, being bantamweight and flyweight. Ultimately, I'd like to, moving forward, I think this is a good fight to sort of have as your last amateur fight. I'd like to see him go into the pro ranks now. And, I know he fights in both their divisions, but I'd like to see him sort of stay at flyweight. I think that's sort of the division he's better suited to. But yeah, he's definitely got all the buzz and excitement around him. The guy's obviously super talented. He's young. His ceiling is going to be very, very high. And it's going to just depend on, how he approaches everything once he decides to go pro, because the amateur time, it's about getting experience. The record that you have as an amateur doesn't really mean anything. It's not like you can look at that and go, oh, this person was undefeated as an amateur there, and they're coming into the pro ranks and obviously helps that build that momentum and that, and being able to sort of sell it moving forward. But now when he does go pro, that's when stuff's going to be real, and how he approaches it and what he decides to do is going to be interesting to see. And then obviously the main event, Lisa and Nicole fought in the main event. Lisa's obviously based in Melbourne, Nicole based in Sunshine Coast, trains at Combat Lab. She's a very talented grappler, brown belt in jiu-jitsu. But yeah, Lisa was ultimately able to shut down the the grappling game that Nicole presents and control. I guess she controlled the fight in a sense that, like you would sort of expect, she pushed her against the cage. She made it a gritty fight. She landed some shots, was able to take her down, was able to, be comfortable on the ground on top and not be threatened by any submissions or anything like that. So, she put on a great performance, got the win. And I believe now that makes her 2-1 as a pro, and on a 2-fight win streak. So it'd be interesting to see sort of what happens next for her and kind of how that plays out.
Yeah, I think she's kind of on her way now, isn't she? She had a bit of a slip up in her first pro fight there, but Lisa's quite. She seems to. She looks quite physically strong and quite scrappy. So she's definitely. She's definitely an interesting prospect coming out of Melbourne down here. But Cooper Royal, I think there's obviously a lot of excitement surrounding him. But he's a fun one because not only is he exciting to watch, he's got a diverse sort of striking arsenal, but he's also got there's a bit of star power in him. I think he's kind of. He's got a bit of, he's got a bit of swagger, a bit of confidence. There's a bit of, he's got an awareness of the audience. He doesn't mind sort of playing up to the audience, and I guess kind of goading on his opponents and things like that. So it's definitely going to be an interesting one. And if he does turn pro, then I think there's going to be a fair bit of hype behind it. So again, it would be interesting to see how that plays out. And I was actually going to mention, like you touched on there, that maybe he looked I've only seen a couple of his fights, but he probably looks a bit more suited to flyweight for mine as well. So it'd be interesting to see if he does pick a weight class, or whether he's just so confident that he wants to sort of continue on this sort of champ thing. Have a strap on each shoulder. So it's going to be a fun one for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And, a real quick point to make about the guy, he's young. The guy's super young. So the whole thing that, that's happening now with, especially the showman that he is, and that, he's a young guy, he's confident, he's going out there, he's enjoying himself. So, it's just got to, and he does the work. I've seen the guy train, I've seen him on the mats, I've seen him in the gym. He puts the work in. So he's definitely doing all the right things, and he's got the confidence. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely, and okay, so we'll leave it there. And for everyone who's in Melbourne, make sure you get down to Hex Fight Series at the Melbourne Pavilion on Friday night. Watch Justin Van Heerden in action, among others, of course. JJ Ambrose versus Abel Brightes, I think is the
Brights,
the Brights is the main event. Jamie Hunt versus Nikos Trepka in the co-main event. So yeah, make sure you get down there. For those who aren't in Melbourne, the stream is on. I think you can access it via the Hex Fight Series website. But of course, for Fight Talk Down Under fans, you can catch us on YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean. Of course, Fight News Australia. We're still working on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. That has been a thorn in my side the last couple of weeks, but we will get that up and running hopefully by episode 3. But for now, it's YouTube, Spotify, Podbean, Fight News Australia, pretty much anywhere you get all your podcasts. So thank you so much to everyone for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
That's us. Another episode done. And I look forward to seeing what's next with these fights, and with the podcast, and with everything else.
Here I am.